Hey guys, this is Yoda. This will be my update to the Prot Paladin guide going into the anniversary patch. As you all know, Prot Paladin is getting some massive reworks going into 11.05. There are a couple changes in the spec tree and a lot of changes in the class tree. For the first question that I always get, is Paladin going to be good in 11.05? Well, the most recent change before the anniversary patch made it so that Paladin, especially with Lightsmith, has the highest damage of all tanks in Mythic Plus. However, you still don't have a raid buff like Mark of the Wild, Battle Shout, which are both worth about 200 to 250k DPS, depending on your DPS comp, or Chaos Brand, it's probably worth pretty close to that. If you're, only doing that much more DPS than those other tanks, then the damage contribution is still going to be lower. Also, with the rework in 11.05, we're getting a lot of cooldown reduction, I would say, on a lot of our talents, or a lot of our abilities. And we are also getting a new lay on hands theme, so we'll go over that in a bit. But basically, Paladin, in my opinion, is going to be able to survive the keys like almost as easily, I would say, as all the other tanks. It won't be like easy because there's a lot of cooldowns and different damage reductions you have to juggle through, but I think it's perfectly capable of surviving any level key, especially after the rework. Does that mean it's going to be meta? Who knows? A lot of people seem to be taken with it, but we will see. In my opinion, Warrior is probably stronger in some dungeons, Bear is probably stronger in some dungeons, VDH is probably stronger in some dungeons, so we'll see. So a lot of people don't really want to sift through all the patch notes, which is very understandable. So this is my TLDR from all the patch notes. So we are losing Seal of Alacrity. They basically said Judgment CDR is going to be reduced as if you took it, but they didn't give back the 4% haste, so it's minus 4% haste. And when they gave back Seal of Order baseline, there was a recent patch notes where they get like some baseline armor. All of that is basically just saying Seal of Order is baseline now, which is awesome. However, they missed Divine Toll. So Divine Toll previously was giving you Holy Power, so it counted as a generator for Seal of Order. So it had effectively a 54-second cooldown. That's gone, so now it's just 60, which is fine. So what are we getting? There is quite a long list. They said they increased Shield of the Righteous damage by 20% and Word of Glory healing by 20%. So that's basically Strength of Conviction was the old talent that did this. We're basically getting a baseline now. I'm not quite sure if the 20% we're getting in the anniversary patch was already given in the most recent damage patch, or if it's going to be 20 more. Blizzard is notoriously, not very good with their patch notes, so we'll have to see exactly what they mean by that. But obviously the Shield of the Righteous damage alone is very nice. Divine Purpose. With the current Lightsmith build, you don't really have room for Divine Purpose, but they moved, if you take a look at the talent build below here, which we'll go over later, they moved Divine Purpose and Divine Toll both into the middle gate, so you can almost take Divine Purpose now. Lightforged Blessing was 1% per Shield of the Righteous. Now I think it's 2. The original patch notes had it listed at 3, but then someone told me there were stealth nerfs. I have not been able to verify these stealth nerfs myself. I was kind of delaying the video, hoping that the PTR might come up, but it hasn't come up yet, so here we are. So I think Lightforged Blessing is now 2%, which is going to be a decent amount of your self-healing. Face Armor, so that's this point here, is now playable. Before, this was in the final gate, and it was competing basically with Divine Toll and Divine Purpose, which you would obviously never take it over that. But now it's kind of just free, so we'll be playing it, 5% armor. Inspired Guard, which is this talent here. You get 15% increased healing during AD. This is a typo. Kind of nice. I wouldn't say it's like a make or break talent, but obviously it's free. Or not free, but it's kind of in the way, so you'll be taking it. Consecration Slow being takeable in the class tree. This is a big change. So basically, if you look at the talent tree here, whatever talent is here, where my mouse is effectively a 2-point node because improved Holy Shield is complete garbage. So they basically got Consecrate Slow out of there. So now it's the new talent, Refining Fire. Who knows how good that'll be. But Consecrate Slow is now in the class tree, and it is takeable. You do have space for it. So that is very useful for Paladin. Sometimes you do have your cooldown downtime, and you have to kite, especially in some dungeons like Necrotic Wake, or in Stone Vault, for instance, when you get massive like debuffs that make you take a lot more damage. You can kite with Consecrate Slow. So basically we gained this talent. It was basically completely unplayable before because it was behind improved Holy Shield. Now we can take it. Awesome. So now we'll talk about the spec tree changes. We have Gift of the Golden Valkyr. We'll go over to the Wowhead page for this. So Gift of the Golden Valkyrie, this used to be a 2-point node. Now it's a 1-point node. It was 0.5 seconds reduction for 1 point. Now it's 1 point for 1 second reduction. You were always putting 1 point here for the proc. Now that 1 point just also gives you a little bit more CDR. Another very interesting caveat here is that before, this was a 1 out of 2, so you could not use it to pass to Bulwark of Righteous Fury. However, now, since it's a 1-point node, you can pass the Bulwark of Righteous Fury without taking Eye of Tears, so that is somewhat interesting. Also, we got Uther's Counsel doubled. So this talent over here used to say 15% for 1 point, and you could put 2 points in. Now it's 1 point for 30%. With the new talent Imperial Ward, I think this is definitely worth it, so I'll be playing it. However, if you play this, that means you don't have a point for Inner Light. If you don't have Inner Light, then Eye of Tyr is worse, so I may not be playing Eye of Tyr at all with the change to Gift of Golden Valkyrie, where you don't have to path through it either. So then there's Imperial Ward. So there has been some confusion about this. The first version that was posted, I believe WoW still has it, says it's 100% increased armor for 30 seconds. This is what I originally thought it was going to be. Obviously, this talent is completely broken. With all the Light on Hands cooldown reduction talents, you can have it about 120 to 140 cooldown. So you'd have like, what is that? 40% uptime or something on like 30 to 40% uptime on doubled armor, which is basically hitting armor cap. Apparently someone's posted that this was stealth nerf. I have not been able to log into PTR to confirm this, so I guess we'll all find out together when the patch goes live. They said it is 30% armor for 8 seconds, which is quite a big nerf, obviously, but I think it was going to be completely broken before. The new version, I think, is still going to be pretty okay. It's going to definitely make me want to try Tyr's Devotion on the right side. So yeah, we're getting that, whatever version it is. Obviously, it's not, if it's only 30% for 8 seconds, it's not like an insane talent, but it's still in the first gate, right? It doesn't cost that much. So it's just a nice little bonus in that case. We're also getting some talents in the Lightsmith tree. So Tempered Battle versus Authoritative Rebuke. I'm not sure which one of these is going to be taken. Authoritative Rebuke gives you a lot more kicks, which is awesome. Tempered in Battle, I'm really not sure how this is going to work. We're going to have to test it. If it reads the way I think it is, like the first part doesn't really matter, but the second part where it says, if you drop below 40% health, immediately redistribute your health. I'm not sure how that's going to work. It could be completely broken. It could also be complete trash. I'm not sure how it's going to work. All right, so on to the default build, which we've kind of gone over a little bit. This is what I'm going to be starting with. For the choices on the right side, there is a new talent that I'm playing called Tyrion's Devotion, which we mentioned earlier. With Uther's Counsel, Lay on Hands' cooldown is already very low, and with Imperial Ward giving you some amount of increased armor, I think this talent might be worth it. I'm just going to test it, I guess, in the start. If it ends up being bad, then I'll probably drop it for either Faith in the Light or Inspiring Vanguard. The choices haven't changed too much before the final gate. You can still play Spell Warding. I played in every dungeon except Necrotic Wake and Arakara right now. But if you don't play it, then you can drop it for Faith in the Light or Inspiring Vanguard. I would not play Improved AD. I think these two talents are both better. In the bottom gate is where things got a little bit more interesting now. So in my opinion, you always play Uther's Counsel, as we mentioned, which means you don't have a point for Inmost Light, which also means you may not want to play Eye of Tyr since the nerf makes it only like 6 seconds. Against certain bosses, it may be very useful, but in terms of like generically just taking trash, I don't think it's that good anymore. Which means you have a free point. You can either put that in like Inspiring Vanguard up here. You can try to get Refining Fire, but I'm pretty sure this talent is not going to be worth it. You can put it in Faith in the Light. You can put it in Bastion of Light. Right now, my default build has it in Moment of Glory. The Avenger's Shield reduction is kind of useless for this one, but the Absorb you get makes big pulls kind of a lot easier, since you have a massive absorb from Moment of Glory. We'll see where this point ends up going. It may even just go back to Eye of Tyr, depending on the dungeon. We'll see. Next, we'll talk about the Lightsmith tree. So my first testing version with the Lightsmith had me playing Divine Guidance. I still stand by that actually in Mythic Plus. The heal you get from this is kind of nice. Gives you a lot of burst damage for certain boss burn windows, like in Mists. And overall, if you're not talented into Hammer of the Righteous, I think Divine Guidance probably is a little bit better. I know Blessed Assurance does sim a little bit higher, even with Blessed Hammer, but in practice, I've always done more damage with Divine Guidance, so I've just been talenting it, and the heal is nice. If you are talented into Hammer of the Righteous up here, I don't recommend doing that in Mythic Plus, but in Raid, Blessed Assurance is worth a monstrous amount of damage, so definitely do play Blessed Assurance if you have Hammer of the Righteous, and also play Seal of Reprisal too, because it's so much damage. This talent we already talked about. I'm not sure which one's going to be better. Next, we'll talk about the left side tree. So there are a bunch of changes up here. I think Hammer of Justice was baseline reduced in cooldown to 45 seconds, so this makes it 30. If you want Fist of Justice, you can also drop Blinding. You can also play 2 points, into Blinding Light to make it 115. Dispel is also, not required to path to blind anymore. So you can basically just only take Dispel if you need it. If you don't need it, then After Image can also be taken. Basically, the top gate has a lot of choices. Just play whatever you want, really, or whatever you need for the dungeon. The middle gate is now a little bit more cramped. So you've got Divine Toll and Divine Purpose here, basically taking up 3 points that you're always going to take in every single dungeon, no matter what, no questions asked. We're also always going to play Punishment. So the only flex nodes you really have here are Consecrated Ground, which you can drop for Blessing and Protection, and you can also drop 1 minute sack. As much as it hurts me to say, you can drop this talent. if you really need bop or improved bop. You usually don't need this for bop itself, but it reduces the cooldown of spell warding, which can be useful in some dungeons, such as like Grim Batol, where there's a bunch of magic busters that really hurt. Can be useful there. Next, we'll talk about the final gate, which is what got changed the most. So, as we mentioned earlier, there's Lightforge Blessing. It says 3% here, but I believe the stealth nerfs changed it to 2%. Again, there have been no patch notes. It's all like hearsay right now, so we'll see how this goes. Faith in the Light, this says 20% armor. I'm pretty sure this is actually supposed to be 5. You know, again, no patch notes, so we'll see what happens. Dusk and Dawn hasn't really been changed, but we're always playing it. Seal of Might, we're always playing this. To get to Seal of Might, you need to take one of these 3 talents, which are all kind of useless. Holy Ritual, I think, just heals for like completely nothing. You won't even notice it at all. Righteous Protection is very useful when it actually does something. So if there's a poison or a disease, you're going to want to take this to Path to Seal of Might. However, if there's no poisons or diseases, then you have to play Lead the Charge. You know, this isn't that bad. 3% move speed, some minor movement ability decreases, but not like a super crazy talent. I kind of just take it. I'm just planning to take it if Righteous Protection is useless, basically. So on the right side, we have Inspired Guard, which I think is probably a pretty good talent. Ardent Defender increases healing taken by 15%. Zealot's Paragon, obviously we're taking this every time. And Light's Revocation. So originally I thought this talent was going to be useless. However, with the new Lay on Hands theme that we've got going with Uther's Council and Tyrion's Devotion, Imperial Ward, you're probably going to be casting Lay on Hands on yourself a lot. In that case, you don't want to be gated by Forbearance when you can, like, you don't want Forbearance stopping you from casting Divine Shield. So that's where this talent comes in. If you feel like you don't need this, or Eye for an Eye, which is just straight up damage. I have no idea how much damage Eye for an Eye is going to do, by the way. If it turns out to do ZTPS, you can also drop it. If you don't want this talent, then Lightbearer is viable in certain dungeons, I think. Like maybe City of Threads, if your healer's having trouble topping the group. You can also drop talent points down here for middle gate points, because middle gate points are very valuable. For instance, Blessing of Protection, obviously, if you need that in Necrotic Wake. Actually, specifically Necrotic Wake, I think like Consecrate Slow, Blessing of Protection, and Minutech are all good. So you may be dropping a point down here for that. We'll see how that goes. So those are the talents. For stats, after playing on live a bunch and simming, I'm kind of convinced that it's just haste crit. I know there's a lot of mastery believers. I think mastery is probably better. It's definitely better against magical hits. Against physical hits, I think it's actually pretty competitive. I think crit is kind of like the same. But damage-wise, crit is way, way better than mastery. So that's why I play haste crit. Haste mastery is definitely certainly viable, but it is definitely going to be lower damage also. I said definitely a lot. All right. Verse normally is a really good stat for tanks, especially like, you know, if you're healing yourself a lot, Verse is usually really useful. But Paladin stats are so crazy that you basically just don't have room for Verse. I wouldn't like feel bad about having it on gear, but missing out on mastery and crit is probably not good. Missing out on haste is really bad. All right, for trinkets, Sackbrood, in my opinion, is the best trinket. It just gives haste and main stat, which is what you want. For the other trinket, you can play Stormlord's Authority is okay, it gives you a lot of shielding, but the main thing on it is it doesn't have strength. It has a very low amount of haste, so the stats on it are terrible. So it's a massive damage loss, but it is the best you know, defensive trinket that we have. The Stone Vault trinket, Refraction Aggression module, is less of a damage loss, but it's also less absorbed than Stormlord's Authority. You can use it like on pull, or if certain bosses are giving you a hard time with their tank busters, like the first boss at Dawnbreaker, or those mobs in Stone Vault that cast the Reflectable Claw, or the first boss in Stone Vault, this trinket can be useful there. Throngus's Finger is Verse baseline, so it's like really bad stat-wise, but the effect is kind of okay. I think it might be playable in Wake. I would probably try to avoid playing this, but if you're having a lot of trouble in Necrotic Wake specifically, this can be a good trinket. If you don't want to play a defensive trinket, then Alvanex's Mercurial Egg is definitely the best one. The main reason being that it can be myth track, whereas all the other trinkets that are stat sticks actually can't be good myth track trinkets because they're like delve trinkets. Mark of Cardos and Skarmorak Shard give you mastery. Mastery is not that great for damage, so these two trinkets aren't that good, in my opinion. They're worse than Mercurial Egg. And then the other choices are delve trinkets. So there's Shadowbinding Ritual Knife, which gives you a lot of strength, some mastery. Kiss of Death, which gives you crit and haste, and obviously the other stats, which are pretty good. The 230 cooldown is actually kind of good for Paladin because Wings is usually like, you can usually use it every other Wings. There's also another trinket called the Spelunker's Waning Candle, which is also pretty good because you crit. Okay, right in there. Then there's also a bunch of new items coming in with the anniversary patch from BRD. They're basically all useless, I think, except for doing damage. There's a trinket called Heart of Rockcore, which seemed okay. For the rest of them, I think you can just sim them against your current trinkets to see if they're actually a damage gain, and they would only be for damage. But in endgame, all these trinkets are hero track, so they're not going to be endgame items. For embellishments, we start off with crafting sword and shield, at least I did. Unless you have access to like a mythic sword and a mythic shield without crafting, this is probably your best bet, because mythic sword and shield are like the biggest gains in power that you can get. If you do already have access to those, then your endgame setup is going to be double Dawn Thread, I think, in Mythic Plus, or you can play Focusing Lens for single target. Cooldown overview, we went over this in the last guide, but basically we have wings. We didn't go over wings versus sentinel. Personally, I still prefer crit wings. It's like a 15% damage loss or something to go sentinel, and also a massive self-healing loss, and the DR isn't that good in my experience, especially because you can just overlap Ardent at the start of sentinel and it usually just works out, or sorry, at the beginning of wings and it works out. But yeah, wings will increase your self-healing and it increases your holy power generation from judgment. If you're playing Moment of Glory, then obviously the absorb is bigger with Moment of Glory if you have wings too. Eye of Tyr, we're kind of skipping more often now, I think, in our default talent build. I'm actually going to change this without Inner Light. This is now a 1 minute CD, useful for bosses, but not great otherwise. Okay, Ardent is the same as it's always been. Now it also increases your healing by 15% with the new talent we have. Its main use, especially against bosses, as a cheat death. Basically, any tank buster in the game, you can survive with Ardent Defender alone. So, and it has a very low cooldown, so against most tough tank buster bosses, such as first boss of City or Dawnbreaker, you're going to use Ardent Defender like a lot, just to as a filler cooldown. Garden of Ancient Kings, this is going to have a lower cooldown now because of the change to Golden Valkyr. It is a very strong cooldown, 50% DR. So Divine Shield is going to be a much lower cooldown now also because we have Divine Purpose on top of the new Uther's Council with 30% CDR. Very useful. Lay on Hands, so with the new talent, Imperial Ward. Probably going to be using this on ourselves quite a bit more. With all the new talents I've been testing basically have about 120 to 140 cooldown on it. I think using it on yourself that often is probably actually going to do a lot for your mana issues. Like a lot of times it's like 3 or 4 wogs to actually top yourself, and now it can just be 1 Lay on Hands, so that's like plus 1 million mana every 1 minute or something, every like 1.5 minutes, which is crazy for your mana issues. Be careful with Lay on Hands yourself if you don't have Lights Verification, because obviously you can't bubble on Forbearance. Spell Warding, honestly, after testing it a bunch more, it's mostly used on yourself in Grim Batol and in Stone Vault, and you can use it on allies more often in Dawnbreaker, and it's also useful in a few other dungeons as well. But make sure you don't forget to use it on yourself. A lot of people are like, "Oh, how do I beat Grim Batol? These guys just punch me and then they punch me again and I have no cooldowns left." Well, make sure you use Spell Ward in your rotation. Bop is also something you can use. Generally don't use it on yourself, because if you use it on yourself, then all the mobs start like attacking your allies. If you use it on yourself, make sure you have Cancel Aura on a very quick bind, and you should also like scream in comms that you're about to pop yourself so your melee don't die. Gift of the Golden Valkyr, the proc is basically the same as it's always been. Make sure ideally that you pop Goak before you proc, or if you proc then use Goak like late on the proc, so if you use Guardian before you proc, then it extends it. If you use it after, then it overrides it. So that's kind of important. The defensive and offensive rotation hasn't really changed that much, but we'll go over it a bit now since the last video had Templar. Basically, for your basic mitt, make sure you're always obviously in Consecrate and you have Shield of the Righteous up, and you also need to have high uptime on Barricade of Faith and Strength and Adversity. What that means is basically just make sure you use your Avenger's Shield once every 10 seconds. Ideally, you're using it more than that because you're trying to snipe kicks, but any situation where you're like taking melees, you're going to want to have those buffs up. So that's the basics. You know, maintain 3 buffs: Consecrate, Shield of the Righteous, and your Avenger's Shield buffs. I only track Barricade of Faith. I don't track Strength and Adversity, but that's because if you have Barricade, then you also have Strength, right? Okay, for the cooldowns usage, usually the rotation looks something as written here. So it's Wings plus Tier plus Ardent plus Bulwark on pull. If you don't have Tier, then obviously this is gone. If you have Moment of Glory instead, you can use it here. For a really tough pull, you would then proc your Golden Valkyr or use Real Goak, whichever order you prefer. Just make sure they're not overlapped. Then you could bubble and then Ardent again and kite. With the new Lay on Hands, you can Lay on Hands yourself here. What you can do is like this: Lay on Hands and then bubble after, assuming you have Light Certification, and then that should give you time to get Ardent back. Then after that you have to kite, and also you have Consecrate Slow for kiting if you need to. Our cooldowns should be a lot lower than they were before in general, so you should be able to do this way more often. Do keep that in mind. So for your offensive rotation, we no longer have to juggle, not that new since we've been playing Lightsmith for a while. You no longer have to keep up the buff for Templar. which means most of your focus is getting interrupts with Avenger Shield. Any pack with an interrupt, your highest priority skill is Avenger Shield as an interrupt because it refreshes all of your buffs, and it also is a double global basically because it casts Blessed Hammer when you get the interrupt. After that, it's Judgment. Since Judgment is proccing Hammer and Anvil, and also gives you 2 Holy Power and Wings, so that's your second priority. Then Hammer of Wrath, then Blessed Hammer. If you want, you can also prioritize Blessed Hammer over Hammer of Wrath in AoE. It's probably going to be more AoE damage because it's giving you resets sometimes, but it is less priority / single target, so take that, whatever you prefer there. If there's no interrupts, then I basically only use Avenger's Shield to maintain buffs, and then Judgment has priority after that. I think Avenger's Shield technically has a higher priority than Hammer of Wrath and Blessed Hammer, even if there's no interrupts, but obviously that's a holy power loss to use it without interrupting. So if you're having trouble keeping your defenses up, then you may want to move it later in the priority. On single target, this is actually wrong. Judgment is still the highest priority. Hammer of Wrath is the second priority. Don't worry too much about Avenger's Shield on single target unless you have all the single target talents for it. It's not that important. For Lightsmith, there's another video going over it. But basically, the way you use your sacred weapons, been getting a lot of questions about this, is number 1, do not overlap sacred weapon with the free procs you get. So the free procs you get, there's one that just happens randomly from Divine Inspiration. And also whenever you wings, you get a free one. So the way that works, the way you want to work that is if you wings, then you get a free one, right, instantly. Then when that one has 5 seconds left, you target a player who doesn't have a weapon and you use sacred weapon. So that's the only time you have to target someone. If you're just using it outside wings, which happens sometimes, I wouldn't worry too much about targeting. Just use it and just go to the nearest person. Ideally, it's not a healer, but yeah, not too important. The tier set hasn't really changed. Remember, you need to refresh the buff if you're outside combat. There's some funny clips of me doing that and letting people fall off my mount. And that's that. Utility hasn't really changed that much. You should have lower cooldowns on it, but that's it. All right. Thank you for watching. That is the Prot Paladin guide update. Peace out.